If you want to routinely be under 1%, you have to remember the core values. So when it comes to empathy and when it comes to compromise, do those things first. Just remember that with compromise and with empathy also comes accountability. This is exactly how my property management company drives delinquency and how we achieve under 1% delinquency month over month. And I'm going to walk you through every single step that my main team does with delinquency today. Step one, we make sure that all of our legal experts that are trained on the delinquency process understand 3 specific core values that we have specific to the delinquency property: empathy, accountability, and compromise. A lot of people are either really heavy on the accountability side or they're too heavy on the empathy side. A great delinquency process in every single step has those 3 core values. You have to be able to compromise. You have to be able to put yourself in their shoes and have empathy, but you also need to know when to draw the line. The more black and white you can make every single step that I'll go into after step 1, by embodying these core values, will really help you drive that under 1% delinquency. Step number 2, on the 4th of every single month, we send a courtesy reminder email and text to all of the balances that are over $75. This might seem a lot of work, but actually if you have one courtesy reminder, you can easily, through any sort of software, we use AppFolio, set up an auto reminder. So our AI automatically does this for us. On the 4th of every single month, anybody with balances over $75 are going to get our email or courtesy reminder. And guys, here's the deal. You want to have empathy. It's why rent is due on the 1st, but we give 5 days of grace. A lot of companies don't do that, right? But that's a mistake. You should have some sort of compromise. Checks are in the mail, right? By having 5 days of grace, there's no reason why you don't get that. Something happens, they didn't receive their second paycheck. So by having the 5 days worth of grace and then a courtesy reminder on the 4th, you're just giving a lot of opportunity for the person to have mistakes happen and still be able to get the rent in on time. Why the $75? Guys, you don't need to be following up with people for $10 or $20 here or there, right? If they paid the majority of the rent, the chances are they're going to pay the last $74. We picked over 75 because that is getting up there, and we do not want that resident to fall too far behind where we can't help them or work out a plan, right? That's where the compromise comes in. That's where the empathy comes in. And on this courtesy reminder, like I said, there's still accountability. We're reminding them that they do get the 5 days of grace, but on the 6th, that's when late fees are going to start. And that brings me to step number 3. Step number 3. On the 6th of the month, this is where at a company, they will receive a $50 late fee for not paying their rent on time. On top of that, our legal specialist will email and text directly to every single resident on the report that is now over $75. They had the 5 days of grace, they had the courtesy reminder, and now they are late. But we do not start any sort of legal process. We just try to reach out to them yet again. So this is the second and third time we are communicating with the resident. This is very important because we are trying to work with the resident to be able to get a plan in place. Something happened, and for some reason you forgot to communicate that with us. So now we are reaching out to you to try to put a plan in place. Step number 4. So now we're the 7th of the month. For any resident that did not respond to us on previous conversations, we are now reaching out again. Text, phone call, email. And this one is going to be a last call, a last warning. Because up to this point, we have reached out to you many times. And not only have you not paid your rent, but you have not communicated back to us. We don't want this to happen, but if there is no communication at all from the resident, we can't make a plan. There is no compromise. We can't even have empathy for this person now because we literally haven't heard from them. They're choosing to avoid us, and we have given them no reason to do so. So this is the last chance to try to get a hold of this resident before we move on to step number 5. Step 5. After various attempts to try to communicate with the resident, unfortunately, we have to have accountability through this process. And accountability now is if you choose not to communicate with us, not to put a reasonable plan in place, we do start the legal process. And in Wisconsin, that's a 5-day notice. So we will immediately move to filing a 5-day notice. And not only do we send a 5-day notice certified mail, but we also follow that up with, guess what? Another phone call, another text, and another email. We don't want this to go to court. We do not want any eviction on the resident's background history, right? We know how hard it is for a resident to find housing if they have an eviction on their record. We have to file the 5-day because we've received no communication, but we're still trying to reach out to them and letting them know that we did file it, and we are willing to put a plan in place to try to avoid what is going to happen after the 5-day notice, which obviously leads to the eviction. Step number 6. This is when your 5-day notice is up. So if you're tracking with me, this is the 12th of the month. If we have not heard from the resident, obviously they've received a certified mail of the 5-day notice. We have now tried to call them, text them, and email them 3 or 4 times. This is when we would reach out to them one more time. This would say something to the tune of, you have not communicated with us thus far. We have not heard back from you after the 5-day. And now, if we do not hear back from you from the end of today, we are going to go ahead and file that eviction. So if you're tracking with me, we've given a lot of empathy and a lot of timelines for them to communicate and make a plan with us. And by the way, I didn't mention this before, but if they make a plan with us, we're very eager to be able to make a plan. We try to make a plan that is fair, guys, and that is where you should have some compromise. You can still have accountability on that plan, and I'll talk about that towards the end. Back to step 6. If they do not communicate on the 12th, we move on to step number 7. Step number 7, this is day 13, and this is when we would actually file the eviction. We'll file the eviction, and just like all the other previous steps, not only would we file it, but we would actually send a text and send an email and letting them know what we're doing. Letting them know that we can still avoid going to court if they would simply work out a reasonable payment plan with us, or we receive any sort of communication. But this is now when you have to ensure that you're filing for eviction. So for us, guys, there's a lot of steps and a lot of communication to that resident so that we can try to maximize our opportunity to help them be able to pay. A great delinquency process is not a militant type delinquency process. What it is an empathy and compromise type of delinquency process that has accountability along the way. And even though we've had a lot of steps, we're only on day 13. But because we have exhausted everything we possibly could do at this point, and there is no reasonable plan and there is no communication from the resident, step number 7 is file the eviction. Step number 8. Obviously, most evictions in most court, even when you file, are 30 to 45 days out. So we have an auto-generated email and text message that will send once a week to this resident we have now filed the eviction on. They will receive a message from us saying, hey, we would still love to work out a plan with you before your eviction on this day at this time. So once a week, they're continuing to get communication from us to hopefully avoid the eviction altogether. Step number 9, the eviction. So for us, obviously, it's the day of eviction. This is pretty straightforward. We've done everything. We've documented everything. We kept all the communication, which obviously is vast, and all of these steps. And we simply bring that to the court. And then we are granted eviction. Step number 10. So step number 10, guys, one of the things I did not mention throughout this, step number 10, we're really doing as like a step 6A, a step 7A. Basically, if the resident does reach out to us and does want to make a plan and does give us a good reason for that, we do a couple things. Number 1, we look over their overall file and see how many times they've been late before, right? We want to make sure that this is not a reoccurring issue and we have a conversation about that. Also, second thing we do is we also keep notes on all of our residents. We want to make sure this is a resident that just fell on bad times but is following the rest of the policies or procedures. You know, we don't want to see notes like lease violations for not picking up their dog poop over and over again, right? We want to know what kind of resident are we compromising for? And then we make a compromising plan by asking the resident to commit to a plan that they can achieve. For us, this is how much you can pay by the 15th of the month, so halfway during the month, and then how much by the end of the month. And every single company, depending on how many units and how much the rent is going to make a different plan. But ideally, you want to capture at least half in the first 50% of the month, if not all of it, and the other half in the second by maybe the 25th of the month. No two plans are the same, and this is where you got to have common sense, and this is where you got to look at how many times they have violated before and your likelihood of them being able to pay. Now, one thing, For us, if they do make a plan, and I think this is where a lot of companies go wrong, is we make them communicate that plan through us through written documentation. Meaning we don't just agree on it on the phone verbally. If a tenant has $1,000 that is due that they could not pay, and they agree to pay $750 on the 15th, and the last $250 plus late fees on the 21st. After the phone call is over, we will send them a DocuSign for them to be able to sign that agreement, or simply have them send us an email back stating that we agree to pay $750 on the 15th of this month and $250 plus late fees on the 21st to have the balance fully paid off. It is signed by them, it is written by them, so that both sides are on the same page. Because that's where accountability comes in. When you make a plan with a resident and they agree to that plan, right? Then you have to hold them to it. And in this case, there is no more warnings. And we fairly communicate that with you. We are willing to make one plan this month. If this is what you can do, as long as you hit that mark, it'll take us out of the court. We will not have to go through any more legal battles, but you do need to hit these dates. If they do not hit those dates, then we just initiate whatever step we are in that's heading towards the eviction process. So I'm going to wrap this up. For the last 3 years, we have grown a considerable amount, right? Last 2 years alone, we've grown by over 1,000 units back to back. So we're obviously acquiring a lot of residents that we didn't put into the units. And I think as you acquire properties and as you continue to communicate your delinquency process, if you want to routinely be under 1%, you have to remember the core values. These are real people that you're dealing with, and nobody, I promise you, chooses to purposely not pay. So when it comes to empathy and when it comes to compromise, do those things first. Just remember that with compromise and with empathy also comes accountability. So for example, at our process that I just shared with you, we do compromise and make plans, but we do hold them accountable to those plans. All of our steps, we're trying to make this work. And I would tell you, it's why we are under 1%. It's not because we're really good at evicting people. It's because we're really good at compromising with people. It's because we're really good at showing empathy. It's because we're really good at putting ourselves in their shoes and trying to work out something that's mutually beneficial. That is what's going to keep you under 1%. And the only way to do that, guys, is to have a step-by-step process that involves a lot of touch points, routinely, through communication at the same cadence and the same time throughout the course of the month. We're vigilant on hitting the communication and having the conversations on the same day at the same time for the same balances throughout the course of the month. If you are just printing the delinquency report once in a while, just firing out a text, never making a call, skipping through the steps, you're never going to have consistency either with its delinquency process, and it's going to lead you to higher and higher delinquency. The average delinquency last year was over 3.7%, right? That's 270% more than us. This year it's even higher than that. Have a process or use this process and ensure your legal specialist or whoever's driving the delinquency report can follow these steps.